the name of the values that keep you alive. Do not let your vision of man be distorted by the ugly, the cowardly, the mindless, and those who have never achieved his title. Do not lose your knowledge that man's proper estate is an upright posture, an intransigent mind, and a step that travels on limited roads. Do not let your fire go out. Spark might replace the spark, and the hopeless swamps of the approximate, the not quite, the not yet, the not at all. The world you desired can be won. It exists. It is real. It is possible. It's yours.
Hello and welcome to the Crypto Economy Podcast. I'm here with Peggy Grande. She is the author of The President Will See You Now, and she is the former executive assistant to President Ronald Reagan. Thank you for coming on, Peggy.
Thanks for having me on, Mark.
It's great to have you here. A lot of what we've been talking about, we're trying to get a lot of different insights as to what's happening within this industry, and we've been talking a lot about politics, how this technology might be able to change things in politics. And as someone who's been so close to politics, I thought it'd be great to have you on to talk a little bit about your experience and sort of what you've seen over the past, 30, 40 years, really. It's not something a lot of people can say they've seen from the inside. So it'd be great if maybe you could just give us a brief background to start, and we can hear a little bit about where you've been and what you've done.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me on the show. I admire everything that you're doing and just think it's wonderful you've started this podcast to reach a new group of listeners and an audience that may not always focus on the political arena. But I happen to believe that politics happens and it happens to matter. And even people who say, oh, I'm not into politics, well, they better be, because politics is into you. They're into your pocketbook. They're into how you think. And they're already 5 steps ahead of you. So don't be a victim of the game. Be a player in the game. And
proactive.
Yeah, absolutely. And at least be aware of how politics does matter to everything from the economy to our opportunities as young people. And the future is all very politically tied. So it's important to realize that politics is connected to everything. So I never imagined I would be in the political arena. I was kind of that nerdy little kid that loved presidents and politics and government. But I grew up in Southern California, and Washington, D.C. seemed a million miles away. And so I never suspected that world would be my world. But, fast forward a few years, life is funny and has a way of coming full circle. And so Ronald Reagan, who was somebody I'd always admired just from books and TV and listening to, all of a sudden came back to Los Angeles after his 8 years in the White House. I had an opportunity to apply for an internship in his office. That internship turned into a full-time staff position and really turned into the role of a lifetime. And so to sit at the feet of this great man, to have a front row seat to history and watch how he interacted with everybody from world leaders to everyday patriotic Americans was really remarkable and really changed, I think, my perspective of what politics is and what diplomacy is and how things really get done.
Yeah, I think Ronald Reagan, a lot of people think of as somewhat of an atypical president. He always stands out whether you like him or hate him. And I think a lot of the people that might not like him, especially my generation, really just don't know much about him.
Yeah.
There's nowhere you're really going to learn if you haven't actually watched Reagan speak. A lot of people talk about how great of an orator Obama was, but you go back and you listen to some of Reagan's speeches, like A Time for Choosing, I think is one of the most incredible, and it's very relevant today, now more than ever, if you watch it back, to realize how long ago that speech was and how prophetic a lot of the things he was saying have come to be.
Yeah. He really represented the timelessness of political ideology. And so, that speech, especially in the 1960s, was something that if you listen to it today, except for the names of a few who would maybe be changed, what he talks about are the same issues we're facing, and the same solutions would still work today. And so there really is this timeless continuum of, those on the conservative right believe that those are timeless leadership principles that apply regardless of the situation. Now, Ronald Reagan was not one to believe that, what he did and the decisions he made were a blueprint or, a roadmap for how exactly you had to follow or do things. But the principles that were guiding him, the belief in the American people, always wanting to return the power to the people, get government out of the way and off the backs of the American people and let them go back to inventing and creating and expanding and building. Those were the foundations of the things he believed in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that always stuck out to me in that speech particularly was he was talking about the welfare state, and he would say, if you just took our entire budget for Medicare and Social Security, disability, etc., and you actually just gave it to all the people below the poverty level, they would no longer be below the poverty level. So he went on to sort of make it clear that so much of this money gets sucked up in the bureaucracy, and the aim never seems to get met. When you look at the war on poverty is actually the longest American war, if you consider that to be a real war.
Yeah.
And really it's come nowhere. Things have gotten worse in a lot of places.
Yeah. You look back at some of the policies he implemented even back as governor of California, and it really was focused on the welfare state. And he was not being cruel to people saying you needed to get a job in order to get out of welfare, but really believed that that is the way that you can hold your head high and look at yourself in the mirror and look to your family, and that there's value and a sense of self-pride and worth that comes from hard work, and that it's best for people to be gainfully employed. And we're seeing that today. We're seeing, hundreds of thousands of people being able to go back to work. And I think that that's good, not just for the economy and get people off welfare, but it's good for the morale of Americans.
Yeah, I think one of the things he really emphasized was, instead of looking to government, look to your family, look to your community. And that's something we talked about a little bit on the last podcast, was decentralizing these things.
Yeah. And really, if we're looking at tax breaks and if we're looking to people having more money in their pocket, that allows them to be more philanthropic and more charitable, to give more to their church that then can support people, to give more to these nonprofits that help people in need. And so it really is, it's helpful on a number of fronts, but Americans having more money in their pocket and to be able to choose how to help people is always better than government doing it.
And actually, to tie that a little bit into cryptocurrencies, one of the beautiful things about how much of a free market this is, for example, it's actually fairly local over in, I think it's Long Beach or maybe Santa Monica. There's a company called Science Token, and they raised $80 million just as a philanthropic organization to support science. And they were able to do that through the free market. It was crowdfunded from millions of people who said, we just want to give you some money to support some innovations. We trust your team. You guys have a lot of experience. And instead of going to the government where they would have gotten a grant or,
10 years from now.
Exactly. And,
when the technology had already surpassed, but they would still take the government money, right?
Exactly. And nothing would really ever come out of it. It would end up at a university. Not to say there's probably some good work being done at the universities, but it's definitely not as efficient as it might be. And I think, this shift from focusing on communities, I think the less power you give governments in general, the more power you're going to give to people to do the same things that they say they want government to do. But I think most people naturally will do on their own if they have the time to commit to it, they have a place to go, if they have someone telling them how to do it. It's easier just to point at some big institution and say, let's let them fix it. But the problem with that is it's this utopian misconception that it'll just happen, and it never does. And that's, I think, the real point of contention is, yes, it would be great if all these things could just happen, but they don't, I think, is one of the major issues. Yeah,
and one-size-fits-all government never works. And what's right for the people of Alabama is very different than the people of California. And even in California, we've got these pockets of little demographics and such a variety, even between Northern and Southern California. Absolutely. And then Southern California is made up of hundreds of individual unique communities. And the more we can localize the decisions that we make, the better off we are.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that you have, I think, the most conservative district in the United States is in California. You would never imagine that.
Yeah.
So you do have these strange little pockets of people.
Yeah, you do.
So I wanted to get your take on a couple different things. I wanted to start by sort of comparing and contrasting some of the things the Trump administration has done. One of the most interesting things I thought was they both Trump and Reagan had points of contention with the air traffic control administration. So Trump recently privatized it, and I know Reagan, when he first got into office, fired almost all of them when they went on strike.
Yeah.
And so I think that's interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan was actually a union guy originally. He came up through the Screen Actors Guild and, was protective of the rights of actors and actresses. He also was originally a Democrat, but then finally said, you know what, I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. But you fast forward to when he was president, and he had not been in office very long, and the air traffic controllers threatened to go on strike, but it was against their contract to do so. They did not have the right as a public utility basically to strike, and he warned them. He said, if you go on strike, you will be fired. Well, he was a brand new president, and I think that they were still testing the waters and maybe misjudged his fortitude and didn't realize he was a man of resolve and a man of his word. And so a lot of them walked off the job. And so Ronald Reagan, of course, fired them like he said he would. And in that one act, I think it really set up so much of his presidency, because rather than being dismissed as a cowboy actor who was playing the role of a president, he was seen as a political force to be reckoned with. And how important early on in his term to set the tone and say, I won't be, made a fool of. I am a man of my word. And not only domestically to have people look to him as a man of leadership and conviction, but also to have the world sit up and take notice. And I think that had to have been one of the first times that probably Russia, here we are all these years later talking about Russia again every day, but the Russians had to have sat up and said, okay, we got to take this man seriously. We thought he was kind of a joke, but he's a man of his word, and maybe we need to recalculate our negotiations and dealings with him moving forward.
And I think that's actually a perfect segue into what I was going to talk about next, which is the fact that, we're again in this situation where everyone seems to think that the Cold War is back, that Russia is this big enemy. And a lot of people, when they criticize Reagan, they don't seem to think about what would have happened had Reagan not been there. So we were at this point where it could have turned into a hot war, which means you're going to essentially destroy the entire planet. Reagan may have single-handedly saved the world. And that's not even being abstract about it. And right now, I think what a lot of people forget is that had Hillary Clinton won, she wanted a no-fly zone in Syria. She wanted to shoot down Russian jets. And the Russians, they hated her so much that they supported any opponent. So when they talk about the Russians supporting Trump, they don't talk about the fact that Russians also supported Bernie Sanders. They wanted anyone but her. And that seems to say a lot about how they felt that they simply could not work with her on any of these things, and she was pushing them to a point where they thought they might have to retaliate, which is not something I think anyone wants. I don't think Putin wants that. It's not good for the Russian people.
No.
It's not good for the world, And so it's weird that people are trying to push them so far to get this reaction, and it's you don't want that reaction.
But
Reagan was so good about looking at people just as people. So he didn't look at them as the enemy. He looked at Gorbachev as a potential partner, or at least someone who could be reasoned with. And I was wondering if you thought you saw some of that in Trump, and how you thought Reagan did a good job of doing that on the world stage.
Yeah, when Ronald Reagan was president, a lot of people were nervous, thinking he was a warmonger. He always had his finger on the button and was anxious to, disrupt peace, not bring peace. But what he realized, and what I think to a certain extent our president now realizes, is that through strength really can come peace. Ronald Reagan's peace through strength. It wasn't just a military might, but it was having an economic foundation of the country. It was having a resolve of will and being unified in direction and vision. And, people thought that Ronald Reagan was very confrontational. His State Department, his own advisors told him not to go to the Berlin Wall and to challenge Gorbachev to tear down the wall. But he was a man of resolve and knew that that would be the only way to get through. And how grateful we are he didn't listen to his advisors and did what he said. And similarly, people are so afraid, Donald Trump is crazy and he's going rogue and he's going to cause World War III. But we look at his stance, primarily with North Korea. And while we are not sitting down necessarily for bilateral negotiations yet with North Korea, we have driven them to sit down and talk with South Korea. And I think that that's a good thing, and that's a good step. He's feeling the pressure. Ronald Reagan really showed us that peace can come through strength. And we've seen, I think, the opposite of that, the past administration. There was this vacuum of power and this vacuum of leadership, and that gave way and let space for dictators all over the world to rise up. We see what happened in China and in North Korea and in Russia and all over the world. It's a vacuum of power. The world needs America to be strong, and I believe that President Trump is bringing that back.
Do you think that is something that's going to happen indefinitely? Do you think it'll always be the case where America will need to sort of lead everyone, or do you think we'll get to a point where eventually, because I think one of the interesting things about the internet is now the citizenry of these countries can actually interact. So it's no longer where it's just these leaders making all the decisions for all of these people that are impacted, but people are realizing, hey, I've been to Russia. They're not that different from us. These are nice people, and, they don't want to destroy our democracy for the most part.
Yeah.
So it seems like people are moving away from this idea that they have to follow suit with whatever disagreements happen at the top level. It seems like people are getting more and more connected and being more and more empathetic across the world.
Yeah. I think it's hard for us as Americans to even step into that space, because we look at, whether it's North Korea, whether it was Russia back in the 1980s, these people are oppressed. And so we're not against the people of North Korea. They are victims of their government. And so we would like to see the oppression of the people removed. And, Ronald Reagan used to always talk about freedom in the sense that once people get a taste of freedom, they can't help but want more. And so we've seen with so many reforms in China, even though it still is in many ways an oppressive regime, we've seen so much westernization come there. Definitely in Russia, we've seen that as well. And I believe that North Korea is next on that list. I mean, it's bound to happen because the more interactions they have with the West and Western thinking peoples, I do believe that people, once they get that taste of freedom, they're going to want more. And our dispute is not with the Russian people or the Chinese people or the North Korean people. It's with their leadership, and we really do have a heart to give them the freedom that we have.
Yeah, I think two interesting points. First, I think it is interesting, though, the people bear the brunt of the burden. So right now, with all these sanctions we've been attacking them with, median wages in Russia have gone down 50% in the last 2 years. So, I mean, the people are really bearing the brunt of it, which I think is unfortunate because we use all these measures that don't hurt Putin.
Right.
I really don't think they're stopping him from doing anything he's planning to do anyway. And all of it is unfortunately put on to the people.
Look at Venezuela, what's happening there. It's awful. It's catastrophic for the people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it seems like a lot of the policies we try to enact to punish them, it doesn't work because you're punishing the wrong people. And if anything, it seems like you want those people to do even better than they might be doing now, because then they're going to have the resources to sort of take ownership of their own government. So the more empowered you are by having a good job and a stable economy, the more time people have to focus on fixing the problems that they do have in their country instead of just working all day and all night.
And unfortunately, I think sometimes it has to get to the point of a humanitarian crisis before those leaders really look and feel the pressure from the global community, not just from America, and they really feel that pressure, and the pressure comes internally and externally, and then some reforms have to be made. But it unfortunately punishes the very people that we're trying to help. But that's a temporary, hopefully, situation that eventually reforms will be long lasting and in the long run would be better for them.
I think, culturally, I think the Russian people might be a little different as well. I think because we want to push them to this point where they have to almost revolt, maybe. They're very strong-minded people. It takes a lot, and that's sort of what he's played on. As he said, our people are so strong that we can bear whatever you put upon them, and that's sort of a point of pride to a lot of them. That no matter what we do, we're going to get through it.
Yeah.
And I think,
and so much of that, as you know, is posturing. I mean, back in the 80s with Reagan, you know, Russia was compared to, you know, be our equal in every way. And really it was a house of cards that was waiting to fall. But the posturing was there. The military buildup was there. But rather than backing down, Reagan basically challenged them to this escalation of military might. And it was a race that they couldn't keep up with. And eventually the cards began to fall. And, you know, Reagan, in working with Gorbachev, I think gave him a very graceful exit in a lot of ways. And so he pushed him to the point where he was backed into a corner. He had no out. And rather than, you know, taking the jugular, Reagan really gave him a graceful exit. And they really did then together find a way to bring a better way of life for the Russian people. You know, but democracy is an interesting thing, and freedom is an interesting thing, because there were a lot of Russians back in the early 90s that really weren't too keen on this whole idea of freedom, especially the older people. They had never had to make a decision in their life of where to live or what to buy in the grocery store or where to get a job. You know, they had never even considered having choices. And so choices are frightening when you've never had to make them. But certainly the younger people have led that forward. And I believe that the Russian people are in a very different place than their government right now.
Yeah, I think even the government in some ways might be sort of on the same page. So what I've heard Putin say is, he said, you know, Russia has been either a monarchy or, I guess, sort of a dictatorship, or, you know, he said, for essentially thousands of years, and you're expecting us to adopt your exact mode of democracy overnight. And he's saying, you know, maybe our elections aren't as free as yours. You know, he's saying, but you got to give us time to get there. And he almost, I think, looks at himself as this sort of intermediary where he's trying to slowly push them in that direction. I guess in his mind he's saying, we're not going to go to free elections overnight. I'm going to give you supposedly free elections, get you used to this idea, and then when I'm gone, whoever comes next, I don't care. You know, then they'll figure it out.
Well, you also look at the toxicity of Washington, and you think, are people looking to that around the world and saying, that's what we want?
Yeah, exactly. Are they more?
I don't know. So it's interesting, and, you know, especially during the last administration, so many of the things that we were doing were so counter to what America had so long stood for. You know, I heard Václav Havel speak at an event several years ago, and he said, you know, the very people that looked to America to be the torch of freedom, to kind of be the beacon that guided them out away from, you know, their oppressive regimes into this freedom and liberty. He said, we're a little confused because we're in this tunnel following this torch of freedom out, and all of a sudden the torch is coming back to us, you know, and we're a little confused, like, why all these things that we have believed are the ideal, you know, had America under the past administration really turned their back on in a lot of ways. And so personally, I'm happy to see that we are decentralizing government so much, repealing regulations. I mean, one of the things that the Trump administration is doing that I don't think anybody's really talking about, that's falling under the radar, is the repeal of regulations and getting government off the backs of people, getting them out of the way, allowing people to innovate and build their businesses without so much regulation and red tape and all the government hoops to jump through. And I think that regardless of, you know, this talking points of the day, that is a lasting legacy that Trump is really establishing that nobody's really paying attention to, that I think is crucial.
Yeah.
And allows businesses like yours probably to emerge and to lead.
The Regulation A filings, it makes all the ICOs possible. But yeah, something I was thinking is, you know, at least with the Russian people, they know their elections are not going to be transparent. They know they're being rigged. But here, a lot of people don't realize what's going on. And you have, in Los Angeles alone, 5 million more people voted than are registered to vote.
How's that work?
You know, we love to think that our democracy is this perfectly functioning entity when there are a lot of ways to skirt it. And I think there have been a lot of intentional efforts to do so, and a lot of campaigns. You know, everyone hears the rumors of people getting bussed in, or you know, and there are videos of people who maybe just have work visas who will go in and vote just to prove a point. They'll say this is totally doable, and a lot of that is because, for one thing, to get a driver's license, you don't necessarily need a social security number. In places like California, and New York
is just going to issue a city ID card of something that will allow you to, vote with that. And they've said no, it doesn't, because you need proof of citizenship. They're not checking that, and so of course you're allowed to vote just with an ID card.
And so they'll say it's voter suppression. It's like, is suppressing someone just to ask for an ID? We want to make sure someone's
we have to show an ID to buy a drink, to get on a plane, to do so many things.
You would think that to vote on, if you have to do all those things, you would need one as well. And that's something interesting that Russia is doing. Is in St. Petersburg, they've just adopted a blockchain voting system. So that's actually, in my opinion, one of the best ways to create total transparency, because it's a public ledger, so everyone can see and ensure that all the people who are voting are actually registered. You don't have to see their votes particularly, but it makes everything about government more transparent. And I think one of the reasons he's doing that is because he's expecting us to get him back, and he realizes this is actually the best way to prevent that, ironically. So, I think that's a great thing for the Trump administration to look into. Is, we already have, our phones know what our faces look like. There's the privacy argument, I think. It's
that ship has sailed.
Right. So it's like, why don't we just let our phones verify our faces, and we do everything else on our phones. Imagine the voter participation rate if you had to tie your social security number to your face, and then you got an app where you could vote on. Then you don't have all these. It's like a circus when you go to the voting booth, and it's all for show, but really I don't think it provides much as far as the security, and it definitely disincentivizes a lot of people from coming out in the first place.
It'll be interesting to watch, because America truly is a collection of states. And so while I believe there need to be some federal standards, I still believe that the integrity of the process is best protected when elections are run by 50 individual states, because they can do it in the way that they want with federal support. But I don't know that we're ready to go to an actual national election system, because I think at least right now people are very suspicious of that, and they're suspicious of government. But I do think that there's so many ways that technology can be integrated into it and make democracy truly more democratic and involve more people, not less people, make people feel like it really is a citizen government, and that we the people still tell the government what to do, not the other way around. And so definitely technology needs to be integrated. The whole system needs to be overhauled. And if anybody's going to do it, I really think the Trump administration, from top to bottom, is looking at things and saying, from a business perspective, I know we've always done it this way, but why? Do we know that there's a better way? Because a lot of bureaucrats, they haven't been in the real world for decades, if ever, and they probably don't know that there is a better way, or what resources are available from a technological standpoint.
I think another interesting thing, just so that people understand, I think there's this big disconnect, because you send a check and it gets put into this giant slush fund, and you have no idea where it's going. Most people have no idea what the proportion of money spent on the military and healthcare. So they'll say, we want universal healthcare, and you'll say, do you know how much that costs? Do you understand how the economics, because it all sounds great in theory, but somehow you got to figure it out. And I think one of the first things you want to do is make people aware of where their money is going. And one interesting way you could sort of integrate technology is if you ran the tax system on a blockchain, people could follow every dollar they paid the government and track it through the agency, find out where it's going. And you could actually say, oh, okay, well, all of my dollars went into this program that I didn't even know existed.
And the more I look into it, maybe it shouldn't exist.
Did I just pay? Did I work 3 months out of the year to support this? Because I don't really like that. And you can get to a point where people might be able to specify where they want it sent. You can get it to the point where you are voting with your dollars, because.
And I think something like that would probably maybe start tipping the scales toward entitlement reform, because if you look at the proportion of dollars that are spent both on the state level and the national level that goes to entitlements, If people saw that,
Yeah.
I think they would be pretty enraged, because they would be looking, saying, you know what, I work hard all day long, all year long,
Yeah.
and I'm sending my money in, and it's going to people who haven't necessarily worked for decades or maybe ever, or going to, family members of people who worked long ago. And, maybe we should be looking at that again. And I think if there was a connection directly between money out of my pocket, I hate when I hear, oh, well, the government spends its money. That's not the government's money. That's
No.
my money.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
your money. That is not, the government only has the money that we, the people, send it. And so to have them be more accountable would very much be helpful, and to have that be a transparent process. I think that a lot of these slush funds that exist on the federal level would start going away pretty quickly if people realize that's my dollar from my pocket going into something that I don't stand for or believe or think should exist.
Exactly. I think the great thing about blockchain technology is just the transparency. So you can make it more transparent. You can have a public ledger where every single transaction is there, and you can follow it and you can see what it's doing. And the government can tailor it to how they would like. Maybe you just see the department, but it's something that just gets people more involved in the process. And I think that's what's important, is giving people the opportunity to see what's happening. I think that's one good thing about what's happening now, is people now more than ever are involved in the process, or they're trying to get involved. But I think they're getting involved on a very surface level, where they're not trying to actually enact any change. They don't have new ideas they're trying to put forward. They're just trying to be the loudest voice in the room.
They've got their talking points, but they're not necessarily based in fact or reality, and there's not much transparency with the actuality of what's happening. So,
and I think that's also, so I've always been in support of business, and that's sort of where I've come from. You've taught me a lot about that. But I think one point of contention where it's challenging a lot of the things I believe are these big tech companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter, where they're silencing a lot of people. They have an incredible amount of power. They control the information gateway. They decide if a story is popular enough. They have these algorithms that don't actually just decide on if the story is the most tweeted or the most hashtagged. They decide on this factor of, well, if it's something we don't support, then it's not. They tailor it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really scary, because you're getting all these developers coming out and saying, yeah, they're shadow banning people, where you'll have no idea that no one can see anything you're doing.
Right.
And when you look at how important these things have become to communicate, it makes me wonder, do you break them up? Well, like, how do you fix that problem? Because that's really scary, and especially if you look really deeply into it, maybe it's a little too conspiratorial for you, but Google was, seed funded. Google Earth came entirely from the CIA. You have the NSA funding a lot of these companies. So you have this sort of partnership between government and business, especially these big businesses, that I think is not in the best interest of people.
Well, and they're not transparent about it. And so unless you look into it, you just think it's a business being a business, and they have the right to do what they want. But if they claim to be a place where there's free speech and open exchange of ideas, and they're not, then that's problematic. You look at everything from like Dennis Prager University, which clearly is conservative and on the right, and a lot of his content has been removed from YouTube and removed from Facebook because it's classified as incendiary or something like that. And you think it's not. It's just a different point of view, and it's been completely banned. Being, a conservative, I have countless numbers of friends who are involved in organizations who have been removed or banned or put on, a 30-day hold off Facebook or off Twitter. And, it goes back to similarly during the last administration, when you look at these conservative organizations that were going through the IRS and trying to get 501c3 classification. And we can't forget about things like that, because that was the government picking and choosing winners and losers. That was them disallowing people to have a point of view that was contrary. Now, whether you go into, where do those filters come as far as taking down actually dangerous or inappropriate content, that's one thing. But a conservative viewpoint, that's hard to believe that that falls under the same classification. And I think that, people who are on the right, people who are having their content banned or removed really need to step forward and, become those loud voices and work through this administration and through this Congress when they have an opportunity to actually have a platform to be heard and really figure that out. Because I don't know what the answer is. I just know that what's happening now is not right, because they do have a monopoly on the distribution of information. Yeah. And when it's given the appearance of fair and equal and it's not, then that's not right.
Yeah, and I think what's really scary as well is, like you said, they determine what the meanings of these words are. So maybe there is something in the policy that restricts hate speech. Well, you can take that word and you can make it into anything you want, and they've done that. And even things like the Second Amendment, they'll say, well, that doesn't apply to assault weapons.
Right.
Or, well, what is an assault? That doesn't even exist in the vernacular.
Yeah, that's not even a particular type of gun. Yeah.
Exactly. So you've seen a lot of people try and just change, and that's the problem with written law, is written law is only as strong as the definitions attached to the words in it. And, if you can
and it's always several years at best behind what's happening. And so, to your point even about banning assault weapons, okay, well, they're going to call them something else and produce them a different way. And, then the law, by the time it gets enacted, is not even going to be relevant. So
living in California, it's hilarious because I've been in lots of gun stores, and every couple years, the guns will just start looking funkier and funkier. And it's just because they're getting around these
they're
laws.
Repackaging.
Yep. The same.
Yep.
But they'll say, for people who don't know, they'll say an assault weapon has 3 characteristics. One is like a foregrip. The other one is like a detachable magazine. And so what they'll do is they'll have something called a bullet button, where you need to press the button with a bullet to eject the magazine. And according to the law, that doesn't count. And then instead of like having a foregrip, you'll just have to hold the thing with, and it doesn't change anything.
Right, the mechanics of the gun. Yeah.
And these gun manufacturers are so quick to skirt the laws. They're prepared for this. In a matter of days, they can fix it.
Yeah.
And so that's the issue, is a lot of people think just by writing things into law, it's going to solve the issue.
Well, and as we've seen, those who don't wish to follow the laws aren't going to follow them anyway. And so all it does is make anything and everything more difficult for those who do follow the letter of the law. But people who are intent on harm, whether it's online or in person, are going to do that regardless of what a piece of paper says.
And coming back to one of your previous points, I think this might kind of contradict that, where you were saying once people have had a taste of freedom, they want more. It seems like people want less a lot of the time these days.
I think they want more freedom to state their point of view, but they want freedom from having to hear other people's point of view if they don't agree with. And that's, I think, one of the most dangerous things about the generation that I see coming up, is they've been so sheltered from opposing viewpoints. I don't think they even know what people who think differently than them say. And I believe that if you put any two people in a room together and you sit across the table from each other and talk face to face, you will find things you agree upon. You may disagree on 1,000 things, but you'll find 2 or 3 things you agree upon, and you could use that as a foundation for moving forward. But when we're unwilling to even get in the same room with people we disagree with, or maybe think we disagree with, that's frightening. There was some stat, I forget what it was, but they were talking about young people on the left politically, and ask them, like, how many friends on Facebook or social media do you have that are conservatives? And it literally was like none. None. So they're not even, wear it as a badge of honor. But how scary that we're so afraid to have dialogue and have conversation with people that we think we disagree with, when actually we may have a lot that we agree upon. We're just listening to different sources, or consuming our information in different ways. But I think at the heart, Americans want what's best for America. We all want what's best for the world, especially people who are living in circumstances that are far worse than the beautiful, comfort conditions we live in for the most part. And I think the heart of American people are very much the same, but how we express it is sometimes very different.
I think maybe I'm thinking more in terms of, my generation, where it seems they're so willing to trade freedom for security. I mean, look at safe spaces. That's protecting protecting your ears
Yeah.
from words you don't like.
Yeah.
They're willing. So that's
And
what's
that is such an
terrifying.
illusion, because once you exchange liberty for a sense of security,
Yeah.
you never get that back. I mean, it is very hard
TSA.
to get more and more freedom and liberty. But you're exchanging it for a thought. There's
Yep.
no promise of safety and security. I
Never.
mean, you go through, a strip search at TSA and people still get weapons by, and people still do bad things on planes. And so it is this, it's an illusion. It's not, and it's a dangerous thought that we don't have to be responsible for our own selves and our own actions and those around us, but that, again, government is going to take care of it. Laws are going to fix it. Other people and other things are going to make us safe and keep us insulated from things we don't want to hear or see. And that's just not true.
I think something I've heard a lot of other people talk about is how with a lot less religion and things like that, people are looking to government to sort of fill that void. So you've seen people who, a lot of very hardcore atheists, I guess you could say, on the left, who have rejected, any sort of ideas about theology, seem to believe in government. They seem to be, they seem to be exerting the same characteristics as somebody might have during the Inquisition, where anyone who denies the
Yeah.
the word of whoever they're
Government has become America's daddy,
Yeah.
and we all look to government to be our safety and security. And I think that over some of the past few years, especially, that's been very intentional. And with the breakdown of the American family comes an increased reliance on government. With the attacks on, value-based institutions, faith-based institutions, churches, and places like that, that is undermining the very core foundation of families and communities and trying to replace that with government. And we know that that's no substitution for it, but we see how that plays out. All the studies show that, the best thing for young people growing up is to grow up into a stable, loving home and in a safe and secure community. And, a faith base certainly contributes to that, but that's not what the government wants. They want reliance on them, and that's not best for people.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that. So another thing I was thinking about is we have this Congress. And I think this is one of the reasons a lot of young people are so frustrated is you have typically, when you look at the way American society has worked, you'll have younger generations following the laws put in place by an older generation. So the laws of their parents typically apply to them. But now we have a system where it's almost like the laws of our grandparents apply to us, because everyone in Congress, they're so old.
Yeah.
So, they haven't done much. And that's, I think, one of the big risks is because of that, they're so behind on the technology that it seems like they, need to have classes on this stuff. They need to go back to school because things have passed them by in such a way that they might pretend to understand what artificial intelligence is. They might think they understand what cryptocurrencies are, but in reality, they have no idea. And these are the people tasked with preventing some sort of catastrophe that comes as a result.
Yeah.
And things are only moving quicker and quicker, and instead of addressing them, they're just ignoring them completely.
Well, you look to, ironically, so many young people identify with the party of the left. And if you look at the leadership on the left, these are very elderly people.
Yeah.
And really, conservatives well outnumber as far as young people that are represented in Congress and even in the Senate. You've got much younger representation on the right. And so you wonder, so long the left has assumed the vote of young people. And I just really think that I would encourage young people to look at what's happening on the right. And are these the people who are leading the calls for cybersecurity and leading the conversation on artificial intelligence and leading, the charge on looking at the world's economy and how America can be a leader in that space, not a follower in that space. And so I agree. Congress has become very old and very out of touch, but ironically, that's primarily on the left. We have a few of our old guys on the right, too, but you look at the leadership of the left, completely out of touch, and doubling down on that,
Nancy
actually.
Pelosi.
Yeah.
She doesn't understand her base enough to understand how not to piss them off anymore, I think, which is what's crazy. She's getting shouted down at her own speaking events. She thinks she's this hero, and she doesn't even realize where she's sort of guided them.
Well, it goes to show that people need to be engaged in politics. They need to be looking at who their leaders are, because the leadership really does matter. And what happens in Washington does matter in your community and in your school and in your home. And we really need to be citizen activists and really be part of the process and be aware of the process and make our voice heard and do it in a way that truly aligns with what we believe, not necessarily what we're told to believe.
And I think that's something that I think sort of contrasts Trump and Reagan. Is it seemed like Reagan was much more principled in his beliefs. He seemed to stand much stronger on them, whereas Trump will sort of, put his finger to the wind and figure out where people want to go. And I think it's interesting. I'm not sure which you feel is the better way to do things. Is it that you want to represent all the people you're, I guess, essentially elected to represent, or do you want the people to elect you based on these principles that you've already stated, and then regardless of where public opinion goes, legislate according to those?
Times are different, and like I said, I don't think Ronald Reagan would think that his was a template for moving forward. We need strong leadership, but strong leadership can take a number of different forms. I think Donald Trump is probably in a no-win situation. If he was strong and forceful and said, this is the way we're going to do it, he would be accused of being a dictator. But then he listens to both sides of the aisle, and that makes the right nervous, and it makes the left feel like, okay, he's listening, but I think he's going to probably do what he wants to do anyway at the end of the day. And they don't want to be seen as in alignment with him. So he's absolutely in a no-win situation. But I think in this era where everything is much more transparent, people are much more in tune with what's happening in Washington and able to access that information if they want it. I think some of these listening sessions that he's done recently are brilliant because it really gives him an opportunity to showcase his leadership. It also gives an opportunity to show how he is willing to have conversations with both sides of the political aisle, and he's willing to come to conclusions and decisions that may be equally unpopular, but feels like maybe is building consensus or moving toward the direction he wants to go. Ronald Reagan was one who believed you may not get 100% of what you want every time, but let's take 60% and let's go back for the other 40% later. Congress historically in the past has really, died on the sword of their principles and been unwilling to do anything. And that doesn't benefit anything if nothing is moving forward and nothing's being done. We see that in Congress's low approval rating. People don't like a stalemate. And so I think at least the illusion of we're having conversations across the aisle, we are going to go get things done. It may be equally unpopular, but both sides are going to get something they want out of it as well. I think for this era is probably his best way forward.
I think there is something to be said about having the bravery to have these divergent opinions where he's going against the crowd, but he's willing to do it. So many politicians aren't willing to stick their head out and possibly get hit by all this flack. And I don't think he wants to be unpopular. I think he really, and that's one of the reasons I've never believed in the Russian collusion thing, is I don't think he's seeking power. I think he's seeking respect. I think that's something he's always wanted. He's always been made fun of by a lot of people. Obama's cracking jokes at him during the Correspondents' Dinner, and so he was never this insider elite of the elite billionaire. They sort of cast him aside as a joke, and all he ever wanted was their respect, and now he's realized, I don't need their respect. I want the respect of the American people, and I'm hoping that by doing the hard things that no one wants to do, that eventually down the line people will realize that I was doing this for them and I was never doing it for myself.
And he's listening to people that haven't been listened to for a long time. We see that these hubs of power, whether it's LA, DC, New York, they're so isolated and insulated from real life and real people. And they're not listening to people. They mock the flyover states. They mock small town America. And Donald Trump has given voice to those people. And there was an interesting piece right after Donald Trump was elected that I thought summed up so well how the two different sides see him, and said for those who support Donald Trump, they take him literally For those who are detractors and don't like Donald Trump, they take him literally, but they don't take him seriously. So every word he says, and we see this, whether it's like the trade deal, that he was talking, the trade tariffs that he was talking about, people are flipping out, not realizing that he's a negotiator. This is a tactic he uses. He goes so extreme, and then he's going to come back to something that people will say, oh, okay, well, that's better, and that's more principled or reason. So those who don't like him take him literally and flip out on every word, but don't take him seriously. Those who support the president don't take him literally, don't freak out on every word he says, but take him seriously. So what's the heart and the essence of what he's trying to accomplish and get done? That's what people who support the president see. They're taking him seriously, but not hanging on every word literally. And even a year in, the left has not learned that and are still, just going insane over every word he says.
I mean, it's pretty incredible what he's actually gotten done, and I think that's something interesting as well as you look at presidents like JFK and Reagan and Trump now. I think those are sort of the three most outlier presidents a lot of people think of, and it's crazy how much they get done just from coming sort of outside the political fray. Not so much JFK, but it seems like when you really want to get things done, it's not that hard to get it done, which throws into question a lot of the legacies of some of these other presidents where they haven't really done much.
Well, I appreciate the urgency with which he approaches the task and the job, because those of us who are taxpayers, who are trying to work a business and trying to raise a family and trying to support our family, we feel that urgency every single day. And, I kind of laughed at the beginning. They were talking about, Donald Trump is working his staff into the ground because they're working late into the night. And I'm thinking, every business owner in America does that. And maybe the bureaucrats in D.C. aren't used to that, but the working class all across America feels that. You work late into the night if you have to. The clock doesn't shut off at 5 o'clock. That doesn't feed your family. And so I appreciate the urgency with which he is approaching the job. And whether you agree with everything he does or not, it's irrelevant. But he's approaching it with a sense of urgency. I need to get government out of the way and off the backs of people. I need to make change and make these reforms and make these repeals happen because people have been oppressed too long. Barack Obama is going to regret all the things that he did by executive order and executive fiat. He did not go through the Congress. In essence, he wrote his legacy in sand, and Donald Trump is day by day erasing it because he can through executive order, through all these regulation repeals and things. He's in essence erasing much of Barack Obama's legacy, but that's Obama's fault because he wrote it in sand. He didn't etch it in stone. And I personally would love to see Trump get more things through the Congress, because that will be a lasting, permanent legacy that then cannot come in and be erased by the next president.
Yeah, I think as time goes on, you're going to see more people willing to work for him, the more they realize this is something they're going to have to do.
I think we're seeing that already. A lot of the never-Trumpers, even in his own party, we see a few, leaving Congress because they absolutely can't stand him or can't work with him, whatever it is. But you see a lot of people coming on board and realizing that, okay, he's actually surprisingly getting things done. I wrote a piece that placed recently on foxnews.com that was talking about how, Donald Trump for so many people is like nails on a chalkboard. He grates on them, he gets on their nerves, they don't like the style. And my challenge to the readers of this piece is, can we look past the style and look to the substance? Can we look at the things that he's doing that actually are making changes that are benefiting American workers and American people? Can we get past the hysteria of, that hurt my feelings, or I wish he would have said it a different way, or I wish he didn't tweet that or say that or put that person down? Can we get past the style and look at the substance and accept the gifts that he truly is giving our economy?
Yeah, people seem to forget they can just turn off the TV.
Yeah.
You
unfollow him on Twitter. You just,
If you don't like watching Jersey Shore, you don't have to watch it. You don't have to be that involved.
But I don't see those people complaining and saying, I got more money in my paycheck this month. I definitely don't want to take that because it came from President Trump. I don't see them returning that very eagerly.
Back to the urgency. It was, I certainly did not expect tax cuts to get put into place in the next
Yeah.
year, 2 years. The fact that within days
Yeah.
they made sure,
Yeah.
they're up against the wall, but they made it happen, and it seemed like that's how it should work.
Yeah.
You should be able to work at that pace.
Yeah. And I think Congress, for them, everybody likes to be on a winning team, and I think for them to feel like they actually got something accomplished, you kind of see a little skip in their step.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell, who hasn't skipped in decades, probably. Did I actually see him smile?
Yeah, right.
But I think when you do have a team that's coming together and to work on things and are getting things done, that they're seeing people are supporting, tax cuts. Democrats are going to have a hard time this election cycle saying, we were the party that said we don't want tax cuts for you.
Yeah.
How's that going to play out in their district, I'm wondering how that works as a talking point.
Yeah, and people with the tax cuts in particular, they love to talk about how businesses are getting, the biggest tax cut, and it's like, well, the reason why jobs go overseas is because you cannot compete when you're forcing a business to pay 15% more than they would
Yeah.
anywhere else. 15% is a huge margin
Yeah.
for a business. I mean,
And businesses aren't inherently bad. Businesses, by the way, are what produce the products we consume. They employ many of us.
The iPhones we tweet on.
Yes, everything we used to complain about are the product of business and innovation, and we want America to be the most business-friendly place. We want it to be the land of innovation. We see the contrast here in California, where we are driving businesses out, we're driving innovation out right out of our borders. We're welcoming in those who want to take from the system, and we're driving out our tax base. And that is a non-sustainable system. That just will not work. And California is suffering the consequences of that, and America is reaping the benefits. People are flocking to states like Arizona and even Nevada, Florida, Wisconsin, Texas, places with lower taxes, and you can't blame them.
And I think when you look at the school systems, I went to several recruiting events for my girlfriend, and they had people being paid to talk to them about microaggressions. And, there was so much of an emphasis to push them in this direction where they felt like they were oppressed and they were unhappy and the system owed them something.
Yeah.
And, they were finally going to give them back what they deserved. And I think that's one of the reasons why you get a lot of people coming out of these universities, and they're programmed to think a certain way, which is not necessarily a good way to think about just people generally.
Yeah.
You want to support each other. You want to work together with as many people as you can. But I think with freedom, you are going to have less issues with diversity and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think neglecting the fact that people throughout history, they've always, psychologically, we like to be around people who are similar to us. So I don't think there's any foul play when a bunch of, white kids all hang out together, or certain schools might have these cultures which are different than other cultures. I think you just want to create as many different places as you can that cater to everyone without excluding anyone.
Yeah. Things are so toxic, and our universities have become toxic, our politics have become toxic, and one of the greatest legacies, I think, of Ronald Reagan is we loved Ronald Reagan, but we loved ourselves and we loved America. When he was president, he made us believe in ourselves. He painted a picture of optimism and hope and joy. He was a cheerful warrior. You see him, every picture you ever see of him, he's smiling and waving, and that was not always a joyful job, and yet he approached it with a joy. We should be grateful every single day that we are in an incredible place like America, where we have opportunity, where we have the freedom to disagree. One of my favorite Reagan quotes, he was from the 1992 Republican Convention, and I'm paraphrasing, but it in essence says, "Whatever history may say about me when I'm gone, I hope that it will remember that I appealed to your fondest hopes and to your best dreams, and not to your doubts and to your fears." And so much of today is appealing to our doubts and appealing to our fears. And can we get back to dreaming big dreams, to dreaming of the world and the nation in a way that's positive and optimistic? Can we elect leaders who are positive and not toxic? Can we paint a picture that is hopeful and joyful instead of so negative? We have so much to be grateful for here in this nation. We have so so much to give thanks for, and yet we choose constantly to criticize. We could do so much better just by turning it backward, turning it around, counting our blessings, being appreciative, giving a hand to those who need it, and not looking to be so self-serving and worry about our feelings. Worrying about our feelings is a luxury that people in oppressed countries don't have. They care about where their next meal is going to come from and how they're going to feed their kid that is literally starving in front of them. How blessed we are to live in a place that we can even care what we feel and what we think.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to realize that what we envision becomes our reality. So if you're constantly thinking that America is going to become whatever you're worried it's going to become, the more you think that, the more that becomes the case. The more you think that we're becoming a fascist country, the more you're shutting down people's speech to prevent that, supposedly, the more that's becoming the case. And
rather than looking at that, how about we are proactive? How about we join an offense and not always be on defense? And how about we don't always be so negative, but, talk about the things that we want and aspire to? What are we for? We always talk about all the things we're against. What are we for? Let's talk about that. And I bet the things that we're for would truly unite us and not divide us.
Yeah, I think we're in a place where we don't have these superordinate goals that we're working towards anymore. We used to have the space race. We used to have, industry, and, I think Silicon Valley may have been the best chance at that, but then they took it and they just threw it back in the other direction, and they said, no, this is not what this country is aspiring to, because this country is full of, racists. And, they started talking about all the problems that the country had, instead of telling people that this is what we can become. We can become this paradise where technology can solve all these problems that we might have, and we can fix the things that we might complain about before we just start, whining about it and hoping that the government takes care of it for everyone. And I think that's sort of unfortunate. One more thing I wanted to talk about was with the tax cuts. A lot of people were worried about the deficit, and so it's something a lot of people during the Reagan era also started speaking up about, was if you're going to have these tax cuts, and now things are significantly worse, national debt over 20 trillion now. So, how do you think we can ever get to a place where that can be fixed? I think he's just trying to grow the economy at a quick enough pace where we might be able to catch up with the economic growth. Hopefully these businesses end up bringing over a lot of the money that they've had sitting in places like Ireland. But I don't think that's going to be enough without major reforms that no one is comfortable making, or at least are politically unpalatable. They're going to have the political will to make some tough decisions, and to tackle entitlements, which I think are a huge part that's sinking not only California, but sinking the nation. We really need to look at those and have a very frank conversation. We've been unwilling to be the adult in the room and say, okay, let's sit down and really talk about our finances, because they're in a really bad place. I would like to think, with a businessman at the helm, that clearly is on his radar. I think he wanted to see an initial infusion of revitalization, and I think that's happening. We saw it in 81 with Reagan's tax cuts, and by 83 people were like, oh no, we're in a deep recession, this didn't work. And then by 83 things started rebounding and going, and so it's never a smooth path. I would like to think that will turn around and the trajectory will then head in the right direction. I think the biggest thing that he's going to do is this repatriation of funds coming from all over the world, by allowing people who have put money offshore, who have built businesses overseas. It seems very simple. A tax-free day or less tax day. They will all pay to come back. But that's business and industry and investment and infrastructure that we want here in America. Those are American businesses that we have thrown out of our borders intentionally by past administrations. And so to me, that's where I see the biggest chance to kind of catch up, pay down some of the debt. Now we have to be very, very disciplined
in taking that money and putting it in the right places. We should not be borrowing from other countries in order to give to other countries. I mean, that just makes no sense at all. I don't know why we do that. And so as these big chunks of money come in, we need to be very strategic. It's like anybody who gets a windfall of money, how easy it is to go out and buy the new car or whatever. That's a lot more fun than paying down debt. But we need to have a plan in place for when these funds do come back into the American tax system, that we really are strategic about paying it down. And that, again, could be a huge legacy that the president, leaves behind him.
And I think that's something a lot of people also don't realize is we're really in debt to ourselves. We have all these bonds that we're putting out, and it's, we're just borrowing from future generations, which a lot of people like to talk about, but it's scary when you realize that interest just keeps adding up. I mean, that's not going to go away, so it just gets harder and harder every year that you kick the hard decisions down the road. And it seems like, for the most part, government just waits until something implodes instead of addressing it. But,
you look at what he's doing even through like the UN and stuff, and really asking some of these countries that are not our allies that we send money to. He's really making them kind of have a come to Jesus moment and say, okay, if we're going to give you this money, we have to be on the same page. And so I think a lot of funding, we borrow from one country to give to another. That makes no sense at all. But I think that a lot of those countries that we give money to are now going to have to be more accountable than they have been in the past, or maybe those funds dry up. And that helps us right our ship as well.
Well, I certainly hope so. Are there any things that you think Reagan did well that Trump might want to take under consideration going forward?
One of the things that ironically I see is very similar to them. I mean, not only are they some of the oldest presidents that we've had. I mean, Ronald Reagan was the oldest president before Donald Trump was elected, which is ironic because both of them kind of have this skip in their step, and they're very youthful and really connect in a lot of ways with young people. At their heart, both of them really wanted to connect to the American people and connect to the forgotten man and the person that's not heard. Ronald Reagan, back in the day, did it through weekly radio addresses and through calling the cameras into the Oval Office and looking down the lens of the camera, coming right into your living room on one of 3 networks, back in the day, the old dial TV. But he felt that he wanted to say what he wanted to say to the American people the way he wanted to say it, and not always go through spokespeople. I see that same heart in Donald Trump. He does it through Twitter. Obviously, Ronald Reagan didn't have that. I think that had there been social media, Ronald Reagan definitely would have been on it. I mean, he was the king of sound bites anyway. I would love to follow Ronald Reagan's Twitter feed. I mean, could he tweet down the wall? I mean, he would have been wonderful to follow. And, a lot of people criticize Donald Trump on Twitter, and certainly I have my criticism as well. But it's not the fact that he's using Twitter. He needs to stay on message, and he needs to use it as a tool to motivate and inspire people and to reinforce his message and to bring people along, and not create unforced errors that give people additional, fuel for their fire of rage against him. So, Ronald Reagan would be also connecting with the next generation, and they're on social media. And so I think that, that in essence is Donald Trump's heart as well. He doesn't listen to me for advice. Maybe he should. But yeah, I think keep tweeting, tweet more, but tweet on message, and tweet things that inspire people and motivate people to support you and follow you, because I believe in many ways he's on the right path.
Yeah, I think I really like the idea of the weekly radio address, and who was it that had the fireside chat?
Yeah, I think it was FDR. Yeah.
But I think what needs to happen, I think, is just now you have CNN who holds all of these debates, and it's like, that's not who you want holding these debates. You want someone who maybe is not an impartial party, but at least someone who's willing to give both sides to the people. And I think one of the smartest things, I think he actually talked about this during the campaign, something he might do down the line, where he would just have 2 experts come and sit down, and he would just stream it from the White House, where they could just talk it over, so people could at least get an idea. Like you said, some people never heard the other side of the argument.
And he clearly has that ability to captivate an audience. I mean, we've seen with the forums that he's held, and, one of the great presidential powers is the power to convene and to get that platform and to get that audience. And so he needs to use that to his advantage and to have these conversations in a very transparent way. Once we can see behind the curtain and see how these conversations happen, we'll learn from both sides. And also we would see a president who is a good administrator and a good negotiator and is a good listener. I think people have been so surprised. These public forums that he's hosted recently, he sits there and listens. And asks follow-up questions and doesn't just, check out and not pay attention. I mean, he's very engaged and comments back and forth with people. And I think that that's very helpful, and it allows people to see a side of him that I think would give people a greater degree of trust and faith in his decision-making process.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think when you think about Congress, you think their whole job should be making these arguments to the American people. You would think that you would have them, this gets muddled because no one wants to watch them on, what's that channel? The one that's focused in on the congressional hall of the...
C-SPAN?
But no one wants to sit there and watch C-SPAN.
12 hours of C-SPAN?
I've watched it a couple times, like when Cruz and when Rand Paul were on for their... But, you would think that they could create more of an event around it. I know Bernie Sanders and Cruz did a healthcare debate. I thought that was a great idea. So if he could, bring these congressmen together, say, okay, well, if you're against my policy, then make your argument to the American people. I'll pick my guy to go up there and give some of my ideas. And then you at least give people the option to decide. You get their feedback once they've actually gotten an idea of what the issue really is.
And it's very easy to have your sound bites and to call people out and be extremely venomous and toxic when you're not in the room with somebody. It's easy to criticize the president and be so rude and disrespectful of our president until you sit down in a room with him, until you're in the halls of the White House, until you are in the presence of that power. It's a very humbling experience. And if people could see then civil dialogue taking place and not just throwing of the darts, I think it would be very helpful to the system of democracy to have that modeled at the highest and best. Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill notoriously were political enemies, but they had this rule after 6 o'clock at night, the political gloves came off and they could be friends. And it would be nice to see those relationships in action, not just the rhetoric, and to see that diplomacy and policy making, it doesn't all have to be political. It is very personal. And it would hold, I think, our representatives accountable. If you see, does their point of view represent you? Did you learn something about the issue? And, what does compromise really look like? I think people talk about compromise, but all they want is for the other side that is opposite of theirs to compromise, which means come to their side of the fence.
I mean, you see the Democrats going for states' rights now. Well, now you get it. I think that's really funny. So I guess just sort of to finish things off, maybe if you had anything you wanted to tell people who might be listening who really know very little about Reagan, a little bit about what you felt like he stood for and what you feel like might be some misconceptions about who he was and what he did.
Well, I had the opportunity to work for him. I was very young. I worked for him for 10 years. I was probably 21 to 31, kind of that age range. And so he was really the first president I had paid attention to as a person. Presidents were things you read about in books. They were on your bookmarker. All of them were equal size and shape, and you kind of think that all presidents are the same. And so following Ronald Reagan closely, I guess I thought that all presidents were kind of the same, and I got spoiled thinking that he was, all the presidents were just like him. At the time, of course, I knew I was working for a great man, but I think history looks back at him as a giant among greats. Not really knowing what power at the highest and best looks like, especially as a young person, you can't really grasp what that looks like. I think I had my illusion of what powerful people are like based on TV and movies and, just your perception of what powerful people look like. And Ronald Reagan, in so many ways, upended that. I mean, here was a man who had a spine of steel. Yeah. He went toe-to-toe with the Soviet Union. Yeah. Nobody doubts that he was a man of resolve and fortitude and strength and conviction and could get opposing viewpoints changed. But what they may not realize is behind that strength was this beautiful humanity and this kindness and this graciousness and this gentlemanly sort of softness to him. And I guess for me, especially as a young person, I didn't know that those two things could coexist in one person. I thought you had to pick. Either you're successful and strong or you're a nice person, but you couldn't possibly be both. And so as a young person, to be able to witness this extraordinary man who was revered by both sides of the political aisle, even if you hated his politics, you couldn't help but like him personally. Yeah. He completely changed my idea of what leadership at the highest and best can look like. And so whether you're somebody in business or in politics or just starting out on your life's journey trying to figure out your way, I guess my reminder would be that you can be successful and you can be strong and you can still be civil. I published this book last year about my years working for the president, and I knew the flag-waving patriots on the right, the Reagan lovers, would love the book. Yeah. But I've been very surprised at the response from the left, and the book's been featured in some very non-traditional conservative places like the Today Show and the Huffington Post and Harper's Bazaar, which is like a women's fashion magazine. Yeah. And the core theme that they all honed in on was, we miss the civility. We miss the graciousness. We miss the ability to disagree without being disagreeable. And I guess my challenge to those who are coming up in leadership would be, can we get back to that? We don't have to exchange principles and ideas for civility, but we're not seeing that modeled. We're not seeing civility as an example at the highest level. And I've seen it, and I know that it exists, and I hope that we as a nation and as a world will get back to that, because Ronald Reagan proved not only can it work and happen, but it can be successful and it can inspire a nation and in so many ways can actually change the world.
I totally agree. And like I said in the beginning, if you haven't seen Reagan speak, I think you should go on YouTube and take a listen, because even if you think you might not agree with anything he has to say, I think you'll be surprised at how effective he is at communicating a message and how empathetic he really does seem. I think you can often tell when someone is not coming across as authentic. You can hear it in their voice, you can see it in the way they speak. And I think he was a very authentic person. So I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
The book is The President Will See You Now. I've read it. It's a great book. It's an awesome look at how things really function on the inside and how people really are when no one else is watching.
Yeah, it's not a political book. It's not a policy book. It's really a character sketch of a great man that a lot is not known about other than his politics and his presidency.
Exactly. So thank you so much for coming
on. Thank you, Mark.
We'll have some more podcasts coming up. We'll have Will and Nasias, who are our CTO and CFO, coming on. Some of the smartest guys I've ever met, brilliant guys. So you'll get a lot more into the blockchain and the cryptocurrency stuff that I know you've been waiting to hear. They'll do a deep dive on all of that, and then we'll have John Koval on sometime in the next couple of weeks to talk about blockchain and security settlements. And with that, we'll see you next time.